will likely be answered definitively, sooner than I would like. It may seem corny, but no one I've met since it began can give me a solid answer as to how it all rolled into motion. Sure, there are theories. Government bioweapon gone awry, super virus, alien particles from space, demons from hell, global warming. Each gets equal billing when you hear the topic come up. Maybe it's a mix of all of the above. Or maybe God got tired of us messing up his toy. And if you don't believe in God, well, then you can refer back to the list and pick your favorite. Honestly, I don't give a damn. I'm too tired from running. How I ended up leading a band of survivors in this Romero hell is my new reality. The time for blame has long passed. Since things began, we've all seen, things best forgotten. Yet I, as well as anybody still alive, know that forgetting is impossible. The best you can hope for now is sleep without the nightmares coming back to refresh those images you desperately try to shove into a hard-to-reach spot in your mind. There are some things that the movies missed, or could not accurately convey. The biggest would be the smell. That and the psychological toll of hearing a person scream as they are ripped apart and fed upon. Seem to see no pattern in what is being called the Blue Plague, due to the discoloration common in the final stages where it is theorized that the body is starved for oxygen. Click. SARS. West Nile. Crap. What's next? I turned off the television and tossed the remote onto a stack of unread magazines scattered across my coffee table. Pluck, my basset hound, twitched a big, floppy ear and closed his eyes in disinterest. I scratched him behind one of those ears, earning a contented doggy sound. I got off the couch and made one of those habitual trips to the fridge. I popped it open, knowing deep down that I didn't really want anything. A thud from the living room signaled that Pluck was on his way, just in case I might produce some tasty treat that would undoubtedly be shared. I'm pretty sure Pavlov's dogs are hidden somewhere in Pluck's family tree. As is often the case when I'm about to make a major life choice, this one being leftover Chinese takeout or last night's pizza, the phone rang. I passed Pluck just as his paws smacked the linoleum with a scrabble of clicking claws that were in dire need of trimming. His exasperated huff caused his thick jowls to flutter. Yeah? No need for formality, since I could see Bill Wright, a friend of mine's name, in the caller ID on my phone. "Steve, are you watching this?" My friend Bill was naturally excitable, but something in his voice was off. "Is this sports-related?" I made no attempt to hide how totally not interested I was. Unless it involves a female gymnast losing some or all of her outfit. "Turn to Channel 7 now!" The near hysterical timbre in his voice had me grabbing my remote before I realized it. I punched the buttons with my thumb. The green volume bar inched across the bottom of my screen as I tried to comprehend what I was seeing. "Of the local police force, along with a detachment from the National Guard, have set up around the town's perimeter. No contact has been established with any of the residents up to this point. Reports from the air indicate that it is unlikely that any survivors exist." The buzzing in my ear reminded me that I was still on the phone with Bill. Also, my arm remained extended towards the television. My hand was empty because, at some point, I had dropped the remote. Another 9/11? I felt my chest tighten. "I don't think so," Bill said. I could hear his keyboard rattling in the background. "This shit is all over the place. And not just in our country, it's global. What the hell is going on? Straight up horror movie shit! Uh-huh. My enthusiasm and interest began to recede quickly. Dude, I'm totally serious! Packs of crazed people are going on rampages and just tearing people apart! YouTube already has like 1,000 postings under zombie attack that show some twisted stuff! At least it did until the site locked up and crashed. So you're telling me that zombies are out there, going all George Romero on the unsuspecting citizens of the world? I was still watching my now muted television while sitting on my coffee table rubbing Pluck's head as it rested on my knee. It wasn't showing me any zombies, just a talking head and a caption that read, "Possible small-town epidemic." If you saw any of these clips, you'd be grabbing a gun and heading to the nearest shopping mall. No, I didn't believe Bill in the slightest. That was mostly due to the hours he, I, and others spent imagining just such a scenario, usually after viewing any of the Dead flicks. Take your pick. Night, dawn, day, land, original, remake. We'd seen them all enough to recite lines like Rocky Horror fans. It always led to the what-if conversation. One of the oldest, most overused sayings is, "Be careful what you ask for." You know the rest. So I did what anybody else would do if their friend called to say that the zombies were coming. I hung up. Sometimes you'll see something in life that makes you say or think, "Well, that's just like that movie." Or, if you're the literary type, it could be in a book. I've read or seen lots of zombie-esque stuff over the years. I always thought it would be so cool. Of course, I'd never go into that dark place that so many fall prey to. Plus, those zombies move so slow. At least until the British influence brought on the sprinting zombie. Man, am I glad they got that wrong. I went to bed watching Talk Show with Spike Feresten. Overall, a normal Saturday night for me. Ironically, it was the utter darkness that woke me. My eyes opened to that total blackness that modern man had grown so unaccustomed to experiencing. The first moments were disorienting. Usually there's a blue glow that filters through my curtains from a car rental place that casts its light on my closet door. I live near the airport, so I can count on 2 fingers the number of times I've lost power. Both times were due to terrible ice storms. It was late April. In the distance, I heard sirens. That is nothing unusual near the airport at any time of day or night. So I closed my eyes with the intention of going back to sleep. An unfamiliar growl signaled the change in my world. I just didn't realize how drastic at that particular moment. The growl changed register. Suddenly, my droopy-faced foot-warmer of a dog began barking furiously. There was no mistaking the message. Danger. I climbed out of the covers and tried to creep to my bathroom doorway. If there was a creaky board in the floor that I missed, I'd be shocked. I peeked down the hallway. My front door was in a direct line of sight, and on the right was my living room window with the curtains closed. Through an arch on the left would be my kitchen and a much smaller window. My apartment was on the 2nd floor and in the corner of the small 30-unit complex. Usually at night, the big lit sign from the luxury hotel across the street shone brightly in my living room, even through closed curtains. Not tonight. "Pluck?" I whispered. I could see his dark shape, barely discernible against my front door in the blackness. The shape moved and was at my feet, pushing against me with its bulky head. I reached down to scratch behind his ears and noticed that Pluck's hackles were standing straight on end. What the hell? That was all I managed before something outside brushed up against my front door. In a flash, my normally docile companion was lunging towards the door, barking furiously. Not thinking, I ran after him, yelling his name and that he quiet down. A dull thud. I moved my agitated dog aside with one leg and leaned over just enough to ease the curtains aside so that I could take a peek out my living room window. A man stood at my door. To be more precise, he was leaning against it, with his back to me. That was the first time I got a hint of that smell. I watched as one hand raised and brushed the doorknob. It fell listlessly back to his side. My first thought was that this guy had been hurt and was seeking help. He wore coveralls and a heavy utility jacket. I figured him to be from the power company. There are moments in life that you never forget. Ones that never erase themselves from memory and end up in that permanent photo gallery your mind keeps. Some of those images blur over time. Others become glossier, as if they've received a bit of mental airbrushing. First girl you kissed becomes a vision of pure beauty. The first car loses all the dents, dings, and rust spots. Some memories do the opposite. That body leaning against my door jerked like it was convulsing. The head snapped around so suddenly that I'm pretty sure I heard something pop right before I screamed and fell backwards on my ass. Something heavy struck my doorknob. That sound was like a slap on the face. I scrambled to my feet and did one of those stupid things I said I'd never do. You know what I'm talking about. The person in the movie has to take that one last look. Of course, that's usually when he or she gets their face eaten off. So I pulled the curtain aside, just long enough to get that peek. I know in my logical mind how dark it was that night. Over time, my brain has filled in the shadows. His name was Ed. I know that because it was embroidered on the left breast of his dark jacket with white thread. There was a milky film over his eyes that looked like a thin coat of Elmer's wood glue. Black blood filled the vessels in his eyes, which add a particularly nasty effect to that vacant, soulless look that lets you know you're dealing with a monster. Oddly, it is also a giveaway for somebody in the latter phases of infection. The dark smears around his mouth are the bright red of arterial blood in my nightmares. Ed's mouth is open, and his face is pressed against my living room window. The apartments I called home for over a decade were not the greatest. Leaky faucets, poor insulation, and cheesy carpet from an era that was long out of style way before I moved in. But back to the windows. They're thin enough that you can feel a cold breeze through them on a blustery fall or winter day. I knew seconds before it happened that the glass was not going to hold. Crash. And just that quick, everything I knew, loved, did for fun, gone. My world had been shaken violently, and the pieces would never settle into anything resembling normal ever again. Ed's stench hit me hard. The smell was so thick that I could taste it in the back of my throat. Two things happened almost instantaneously. Pluck lunged at the body that was halfway through my living room window, and I puked. To say vomited or threw up would diminish the true nature of that moment. It was as if my stomach heaved so violently that my intestines reversed flow and joined in the event. My mouth and nose burned from the bile-laced mixture that spewed from deep inside my guts. I staggered back, unable to see for a moment. Over the ringing in my ears, I heard Pluck snarl and bark as he threw himself at the unnatural thing that threatened his master. I probably owe my life to that stupid dog. His sudden yelp brought me back. My eyes cleared, and I could see Ed holding something in his hands. It took another second to overcome the shock of what I was seeing. It held Pluck by a hind leg and his collar as it buried its face into that soft, warm, scratchable belly. When its head snapped up, long strands of skin and viscera pulled away. My best friend howled loud enough to drown out my own cry. But for a moment, anyway, Ed was occupied. God help me. I ran. I scrambled for the door, fumbling with the lock for seconds which seemed eternal before I could yank it open, and I ran away. I ran away from my apartment. I ran away from all my stuff. I ran away from that smell of death and blood and puke. I ran away from Ed. I ran away from Pluck. At the bottom of the stairs was a small pink bicycle with training wheels. My mind held up a mental flashcard of a tiny Mexican girl. She would ride that bike around the square inner courtyard of the complex. She always rang the little bell on her handlebars if she came up on somebody from behind. She would laugh. So I ran. I reached the parking lot and realized that I had never bothered to grab my keys. The stupid ones in the movies always go back. My mind flashed on that image of the Ed thing taking a bite out of the middle of my dog. Every hero in the movies knows how to hotwire a car. I had no clue. I still wasn't going back. I stood there like an idiot for a moment, then heard a low, steady sound. The back side of my apartment complex's parking lot is a steep, tree-covered embankment. There's a wall made of river rock that forms about a 5-foot base before the earthen slope begins and rises up to the street above. That street is like a border between my apartments and a quiet residential neighborhood. Parked on the edge of that street, just visible through the trees that overhung most of the parking lot, was a big power company truck. It was running. Hoisting myself and scrambling up the embankment, I reached the road. Typical for this time of night. It was 3:42 a.m., according to my watch. It was quiet. I sort of turned a slow circle to make sure all was clear. Farther down the road from me, something may have moved in the darkness. I wasn't about to wait and find out. Still, rushing to the truck without at least a little caution could be as fatal as a stroll down this road into the deep black shadows. I moved out into the middle of the street so as to allow myself the greatest amount of open space, then crept towards the idling vehicle. A large, dark smear marred the driver's side door. I wondered briefly if it belonged to Ed, or, worse, his co-worker. Just as I neared close enough to peer in the open window, a scream unlike anything I'd ever heard, before that night anyway, shattered the relative quiet. That piercing sound seemed to reach inside me and clamp down hard on my bladder. Yeah, I wet my pants. Now, I realize that something like that never happens to action heroes. Well, I guarantee that he or she never heard a scream like that before. Not for real, anyways. It sounded like a woman or a child. I yanked open the truck door, deciding it was time to move a little quicker. Thankfully, no surprises leapt out at me. and I slid into the cab. I took quick visual inventory. Keys, big flashlight, clipboard, brown paper sack. Great. I popped the column shifter into drive and stomped on the gas pedal while twisting the steering wheel hard left. Making a big U-turn, I raced to the corner and did a bouncy power slide. Turning sharp left again, I dropped into the entrance of my complex. I veered slightly left, clipping a beat-up Buick parked in the first tenant's parking spot. The truck fishtailed the short length of the lot where an opening in the 2-story building on my right indicated the entrance existed to one of 2 breezeways. Slamming on the brakes, the truck screeched to a halt and banked right just enough to have the nose pointing into the void. I found the knob and pulled, turning on my headlights. The scene in that dark, tunnel-like breezeway threatened to cause another upheaval from my stomach. Ed, along with 2 more of those things, were clawing at this short, pudgy Mexican woman. One of them was tearing out what looked to be a strand of intestine from a gaping hole in her abdomen. Another was jerking back with a chunk of left forearm between its teeth. Ed was on hands and knees, chewing away at a thigh. Backing toward the steps was a little girl. I struggled to remember the name I'd heard when her mom or dad had called for her. It was my little bicycle rider, Talia. I leaned out the window and called her name. She spun, and I could see her clothing was splattered with blood. Please don't be a zombie. The 3 things feasting on what I was pretty sure had been her mom glanced up, then went back to what they'd been doing. Talia, on the other hand, ran towards me. Zombies don't run, right?
Ayúdenme, por favor. Ayúdenme, mamá, señor.
English, sweetie. I reached down and grabbed the tiny girl, yanking her rather unceremoniously through the window.
Please don't help my mama, Mr. Steve.
Her accent was kind of thick. Mr. sounded like Meester. But her family was the sort that worked hard at their English. Good thing, because my Spanish was limited to a poor Speedy Gonzales impersonation. She looked at me with large, pleading eyes. I didn't have time to explain. Besides, I felt that any help on behalf of her mama at this point would be useless. Mama was done. I shifted into reverse and backed out as quick, and still cautious, as I could. It would be really stupid to wreck now. As the headlights drifted across that horrific scene, I took one more look. My mind was screaming that this could not possibly be happening the way I was seeing it. I slammed on the brakes, causing Talia to fly forward and hit her head on the dashboard. She started crying, but I didn't hear it. Creeping into the breezeway was a short, squat, shadowy figure. Pluck. I watched in painful fascination as my constant companion for so many years nosed into the body sprawled on the concrete. His head pulled back, and a flap of torn flesh hung from his mouth. Slowly, I regained awareness of my surroundings. Tiny fists were pounding on my right shoulder. I glanced at Talia in confusion as the sounds of her sobs poured into my consciousness. The blurred vision and burning sensation in my eyes made me realize that I was crying. But that wasn't why the little girl was pummeling me. A bloodless face stared at me through the closed window of the passenger side door. The mouth opened and pressed against the glass. My mind focused on the weirdest thing. No fog. The window didn't fog up. This thing's mouth was all over the glass, and it wasn't fogging up even a teensy bit. Crazy. An equally pale hand with a chunk missing, and what looked like just a stub for a thumb, smacked against the increasingly slime-smeared window. I heard a rattle of the door handle. This thing was trying to open the door, albeit clumsily. Time to go. I made sure I was still in reverse and goosed the accelerator. Our friend came with us, as he still had a grip on the door handle. I swung around and brought that side of the truck almost flush with the rock wall. A gout of blackish fluid made a macabre Rorschach pattern on the glass. Dahlia screamed again and was practically in my lap. Her arms clutched about my neck so that I had to crane around her to see. My head turned just enough to allow me to see a shape rising in the shadows of the breezeway. I eased the little girl down next to me and wrapped one arm protectively around her. She buried her face in my side, and for that I'm grateful. She didn't need to see what was staggering our way. The thing outside the passenger's side was not letting up in its effort to try and get at us, so I gave another tap on the gas. Gripping Dahlia, I hit the brakes and shifted back into drive. Directly in front of me was Pluck. Without any further thought, I floored it. The time was long past to be out of here. The big truck lurched just a bit as our tag-along fell free and ended up under the rear wheels. Then the front sorta bounced, like we'd hit a speed bump. That speed bump was the end of my boon companion, my best friend, my foot warmer. I looked in the rearview mirror long enough to know I'd crushed his head like a jack-o'-lantern in November. My dog, good old Pluck, lay still in the middle of the Villa La Puerta apartment complex parking lot. I think, in a lot of ways, I was relieved. One sentiment that popped up in most of the zombie books and movies was the desire to ensure friends and companions didn't come back. I get it now. Not just the fact that I didn't want him wandering around as one of them. It was much more. Honestly, that thing wasn't Pluck. It is just so vile to see somebody you knew and loved become a part of the cause. To think that his body would still be moving after his essence, soul, whatever the hell you want to call it, is long gone. It just ain't natural. I pulled out into the street just as I saw Talia's mom appear in my rear-view mirror. I'm really glad that sweet little girl never saw what I did at that moment. What she had seen moments before, as well as what she would see in the next hours, days, weeks, would provide enough nightmare fodder. I turned right. Away from the airport and towards the freeway seemed the best choice. A few blocks ahead, I could see that the power was on. That held some definite pluses and minuses. Plus, I could see. I did a quick look-over of Talia. Not that I'm heartless, but I had to make sure. Thankfully, there were no bites or scratches. I was really hoping there weren't any that I couldn't see. Her face was nestled right in my side. If she turned... Minus. I could see. Here and there, singles, doubles, and many herds of those things were on the move. Or, worse, feeding. Again, really glad Talia couldn't see this. A couple of times I had to swerve to avoid one of those things as they wandered out into the street after the few passing cars. I saw no reason to play death race with zombies. That's it. That's what they are, and I can't avoid it. After Pluck and Talia's mom, I have no doubts that the dead are, in fact, returning. For whatever reason, instinct, anger, hunger, they are attacking and feeding off the living. As I hit the I-5 South on-ramp, it dawned on me to switch on the radio. A monotone, obviously recorded message was repeating on every station I scanned to. The emergency broadcasting system has been activated. Please stay tuned to this local station for information. The message was on a loop. I tried the two-way radio. It came alive with all sorts of frantic chatter. Advised, we have lost contact with Units 7, 9, 12, and 17. Came out of no place and just grabbed Duran. Where the hell is anybody? Damn lady just bit me. I mean, took a chunk out of my arm. As I drove down the interstate, listening to the insanity unfold, I passed a couple of cars that were pulled only partially off the road. In the opposite lane, a few cars whisked past, heading north. There's no way I would even consider heading into downtown Seattle. Within hours, if not already, that place would be a chaotic death trap. I was considering my options when a snippet of conversation caught my attention. The people grabbed Ed. I heard him scream as they dragged him into the bushes. God forgive me, but I was scared to death. Then what? A female voice demanded. You said you lost the truck. So what the heck happened? A few minutes later, 5, maybe 10, one of them came out of the bushes, took off with the vehicle. I turned off the two-way. There was nothing I could say or do now that wouldn't take forever to explain or clear things up in any manner. There was little doubt that it was my Ed they were discussing. Problem being, I was pretty sure my explanation would not be very welcome. Not yet. If things held true to form, nobody would acknowledge or believe what this was until too late. I reached over and opened the glove box. Talia didn't make any attempt to move away, not that I blamed her. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. I rummaged, keeping one eye on the road as I felt around. 2 wallets. That was the same moment I realized that I left mine. For somebody determined not to make stupid mistakes, I wasn't doing so well. I spotted an off-ramp that advertised food, gas, lodging. Veering right, I decided it was time to get just a little proactive. I made up my mind that I knew what was going on, and it was my responsibility to this child beside me to start taking steps to prepare for the worst eventuality. The fully lit service station was perched at the top of the off-ramp. You know the kind. The mini-mart disguised as a gas station with a garage added as an afterthought that was good for nothing beyond a tire change. A small car was parked in a dark corner across the expansive asphalt lot from where the entrance was. Probably the on-duty cashiers. I pulled up to the pump station closest to the doors. No surprise, I saw no sign of an attendant. Or cashier. Whatever. My head was on a swivel, searching for any movement, inside or out. I pried Talia loose and took her tear-streaked face in my hands. "I'm gonna take care of you, but I have to get out of the truck for a minute. I will lock the door. Don't open it until I say. Can you do this?" She nodded. "I will leave the engine running, so don't touch anything, okay?" More nodding. I looked around again. This was a bad time for any surprises. At the moment, the coast was clear. I climbed out, locking the door, closing it carefully, and checking it to be certain. So far, so good. I fast-walked to the glass door and tugged. Damn. Locked. Naturally. Trying to watch everywhere at once, I scooted to another set of doors around the corner. Nothing was moving, inside or out of the store. Yet. I could hear the occasional vehicle speed by on the nearby freeway. I think I heard gunshots from somewhere distant. And briefly wondered what I would do if another vehicle arrived with people having the same idea as me. Also locked. Damn! Just a tiny bit desperate and a whole lot scared now. I looked everywhere for an idea. Turning my attention fully inside, I knocked on the glass. I don't know if I wanted somebody to be there or not, but old habits die hard. No answer. I knocked again. Louder. Still no response from within, or, thankfully, out. That left me with what I saw as my final option. The metal ash can sitting next to the door. I picked it up, dumped the contents on the ground, backed up a few steps, and hurled it as hard as I could at the glass door. Crash! I had half expected the thing to come bouncing back at me. Lucky me. The entire door exploded inwards. Fine cubes of glass glittered like fake diamonds under the white glare of the fluorescent lighting. Now it was time to be quick. I glanced back at the truck. Talia was staring wide-eyed, but calmly, back at me through the windshield. I noted that pump 9 was closest. Peering over the counter to be assured of no nasty surprises, I quickly climbed over and found the panel allowing me to turn on my pump. In no time, I had the nozzle in place and put the lock on so that I could tend to other issues while the tank filled. Back in the store, I stopped at a rack of those burlap carry bags imprinted with pictures of Mount Rainier, the Space Needle, and other local touristy things. Grabbing a few, I literally ran up and down the aisles, scooping stuff from the shelves. The medicine aisle was almost empty by the time I finished. Mostly basic things, like allergy pills and aspirin mixed in with the first aid stuff. Filled 6 of those bags. I grabbed food second, which made me sort of proud that I was thinking clearly. Food would be easier to grab than medicine or hygiene, as this dragged on. At least, that was my logic. I decided that milk would likely become a luxury. It would do good to get some while I could. I paused at the wall of the glass-doored refrigerators when I came to the milk section. My hand grasped the handle, and I totally froze, my heart pounding in my throat. I'd found the clerk. +1. Inside the refrigerated stock area, behind the tilted display shelves, stood 2 zombies. They were staring at me from the shadows, behind the orderly rows of beer, orange juice, and various name-brand sports drinks. A quick look behind them at the main door to the chill box helped ease my heart rate back under triple digits. The big metal door looked shut. I backed down the aisle a few steps away from the milk towards the soda. Sure enough, my friends followed. I tapped the glass like you would an aquarium. They both lunged forward, tangling themselves in the shelving and each other. I bolted, popped the door where the milk was, grabbed a couple of cartons, and headed to the exit. I ducked out into the open lot to hear Talia pounding on the glass of the driver's side window. A quick glance confirmed that a small pack of zombies were crossing the asphalt towards us. They still had some ground to cover, and I transferred our haul to the truck, pronto. That finished, I pulled out the nozzle and hung it up as I replaced the gas cap. I dashed around the front of the truck, and Talia opened my door.
Please, let us go now.
I totally agree, sweetie. Climbing into the cab, I gave the approaching zombies another look. It was like the introduction to a dirty joke. An Asian, a naked lady, and 2 policemen walk into a gas station parking lot. I revved the engine. Put on your seatbelt, senorita. Without a word, Talia did exactly what she was told. I heard the click and fastened my own. I pulled away from the pumps and made a wide U-turn. A glance in the rear view, then side view mirrors. Now for a slight turn of the steering wheel to get things right. I shifted into reverse and stomped the gas. Zombie bowling. I felt the impact and the ensuing bounces as I rolled over the bodies. 3 of the 4 lay twitching on the ground. The 4th, naked lady, still stood. She turned towards me, arms outstretched, mouth open. Back into drive, and again I put the pedal to the floor. I swerved just enough to catch her with the driver's side corner of the bumper. A satisfying thud and crunch rewarded the effort, coupled with the body flying several feet. Down, but not dead? I briefly pondered the idea. Twice dead? Fitting. Talia exclaimed her surprise when I slammed on the brakes and flung open the door. All of the zombies were in varied stages of struggling to their feet. On their backs, they're a lot like turtles. I approached the first downed policeman and was very disappointed. No gun. The second was my payoff, though. His wide, black leather belt held several toys for me to examine later once I had more time. I grabbed a window squeegee as I closed in on my target. With one swing, I brought it down as hard as I could. My blow found an eye socket, which exploded with thick, jelly-like fluid. This thing began thrashing, arms flailing, hands grasping. A second swing. Another. And another. As the face shattered, and the eye socket hole expanded. Finally, the brass and hard plastic squeegee broke through to something softer. The thing at my feet quit struggling. Instantly. It's like hitting an off switch. I worked the belt off the twice dead while watching the others. The other policeman and the Asian were back on their feet, headed my way. Naked lady was bent almost entirely backwards. She was trying to pull her unnaturally V-shaped self along the asphalt. Yuck. Prize in hand, I made it back to the truck with relative ease. Dropping the gun belt on the seat, I closed the door and headed for the exit. A car zoomed past, heading for the interstate, presumably. A screech of tires sounded as it slammed on the brakes, then sped back to us in reverse. The car, a sporty foreign model by the looks. What can I say? I'm not much into cars. Halted directly in front of us. I considered our chances of ramming the little car without taking too much damage ourselves, but decided to wait a second to see what this person wanted. He or she could be just like Talia and me. Still, no sense in being stupid. I pulled the gun from the holster and glanced to see if it was loaded. Check. Safety off. Check. I'm savvy enough to know it is a 9mm. I glanced in the rear view. The zombies were still a fair distance away. Problem was that now there were 7. I had enough time to at least give this person in the car a moment. I wouldn't waste time, but I also was not about to let my guard slip. Get down, Talia. She obeyed without protest. Unbuckling her seatbelt, she slid to the floor on the passenger's side, pulled her knees in tight, and wrapped her arms around them, sort of like a tiny ball. The door to the sports car opened. A tall, very attractive, in an out-of-my-league sort of way, brunette emerged. My mind sped through several scenarios, all of which ended up with me as the hero and her falling into my arms. She proceeds to show her gratitude and admiration for my heroism.
Oh, thank God!
She screamed and ran to my truck. I rolled down the window, seeing no reason to open the door. I mean, seriously, there are a bunch of Walking Dead shambling this way. Sure, they're still a ways off and moving slow, but my mind is still trying to process what's happening. You probably shouldn't be out of your car. I am so smooth.
Please help me. What the hell is going on?
You really shouldn't be out of your car. I glanced again at the group of undead closing the distance, slowly and steadily. One of them was outdistancing the others and had his arms outstretched.
My neighbor did this,
the pretty brunette said, holding up her left arm. Blood dripped from a shallow but jagged rip below the elbow. My look must have given something away, because she hastily covered up. Her expression was a crazy mix of fear, embarrassment, and confusion. Without warning, she lunged at my door, pulling wildly on the handle. I went for the lock, but a shade too late, as the door opened and I tumbled gracelessly to the ground. Talia screamed. Scrambling up as quickly as I could, with the wind only partially knocked out of me, I had no idea what to do. Was this lady one of them? Maybe the newly turned are different. Perhaps the brain died slowly and they kept certain functions for a while. I really had no clue where the movie stuff was right or wrong. Hell, maybe it was all wrong. All of that jumbled around in my mind like rocks in a dryer as I came to my feet. She was apologizing over and over. Maybe she was sorry she had to eat me now. All I truly knew at that exact moment was that she was beside me with a vice-like grip on my arm. There were several of those things about 20 feet or so away, and I was not ready to die. I shoved her as hard as I could, sending my closest threat stumbling back towards the street. I snatched the gun from the cab where it had fallen to the floorboard in all this insanity. My finger curled around the trigger as I spun and fired. She was in the process of climbing back to her feet. With an expression of astonishment, she looked down as a bloom of red spread across her blouse. Her eyes returned to mine in shock.
Why?
She staggered sideways a step and fell. Hard. I still heard screaming. While I was shaking my head rapidly to clear it, something grabbed my shoulder. I whirled around face to face with the speed walker of the bunch. It was a woman, or had been. Her dark hair clung to her face, glued in place by dried blood. Most of the left cheek had been ripped away. Grayish gums and blood-smeared teeth greeted me in what looked like an exaggeratedly evil grin. I raised the pistol and fired. The bullet tore through its throat, jolting the upper body backwards. I felt the grip upon my shoulder tighten, and the head snapped back toward me with mouth open wide. It's strange, the little things that capture our attention in a crisis. I noticed that the flat, lifeless, black blood-veined eyes never changed expression. No anger, hunger, victory, desire, pain, just empty. Truly empty. I jammed the barrel of the gun into the now gaping maw and fired. The creature simply dropped. Again, it was as if the plug were suddenly pulled, like on a radio. Without waiting for more bad things to happen, I jumped into the truck, slamming the door, locking it, and rolling up the window, seemingly all at once. I shifted into drive and launched the big truck into the street, clipping the sports car enough to turn it a little sideways. My hard right turn aimed us back towards the interstate. I've risked my life a whole bunch of times since that night, but at no time was I as stupid or out of control as I was in the way that I left that gas station parking lot. 6 more inches to the left, and I catch enough of that sports car to probably end our ride. Looking in my rearview mirror, I got a sick feeling in the pit of my stomach. The zombies had fallen on the brunette. That could only mean one thing. Since they ignored and even stepped over the zombie that I had just blown the back of its skull off, the brunette was not, at the time before I shot her at least, dead. Adding 1 + 1, I had just killed someone. My mind began to argue vigorously the varying points. She was bitten. It was only a matter of time. You saved her much misery. All the way to the interstate, and for the next several miles, my mind continued. It tried to offer me the solace that no other living, breathing human being would if they'd seen what I'd done. Eventually, Dahlia fell into a fitful sleep. If things were as I suspected, this was only the ugly beginning. It would get worse. Chapter 2. Vignettes 1. Seattle, Washington. Bill Wright tapped his receiver a few times.
Steve!
He hollered. There was no reply. Either his friend had hung up, or the phone lines were already crashing. Glancing at his television, he saw the same report being replayed. The talking head was warning people to stay inside. "That ain't gonna work," Bill muttered. He had been online for the past few hours until the internet locked up and crashed. Whether it was his provider or the overload it was certainly experiencing as more and more videos of people being eaten alive by what could only be zombies were being viewed, Bill had no idea. A crash outside his house made him jump. A second later there was a scream, followed by the most blood-curdling begging he had ever heard. Please, Jesse, please, stop! For the love of... Ah! The voice drowned out everything else for a second before fading to a wet gurgle. He knew he would hate himself for it, but Bill had to look. If it was the Jessie he thought it was, she was smoking hot. The begging voice sounded like that prick of a boyfriend, Carl. Switching off his living room light, Bill moved to the curtains and pulled them aside just a little. He quickly let them fall back into place, fighting to keep himself from being sick. He had seen all the zombie movies with his buddy Steve Hobart, but they'd been just exactly that. Movies. It was no comparison to seeing a person actually being eaten alive. They were in the driveway. The bright bluish-white of the security lights put everything in vivid detail for any to see. Bill was sure he wasn't the only one to look, but he knew he wasn't going to look again. Carl was on his side, his hands opening and closing in rapid-fire contractions as his feet drummed the ground, while the once beautiful Jessie pulled a strand of something from his middle. The way his head had been thrashing back and forth, Bill wondered how Carl's neck hadn't simply snapped. He had seen enough. Taking his stairs 3 at a time, Bill went to his room and grabbed one of his favorite backpacks. He had done a lot of hiking around Mount Rainier and had a substantial supply of outdoor gear. He wished Steve had taken him more seriously. Hell, he wished he wasn't such a chicken shit and had the guts to go after his friend. But Steve lived towards Seattle. There was simply no way he would willingly drive that direction. Stuffing as much of his Sub-Zero gear as he could find into the pack, Bill bounded down the stairs and to his pantry. He always had a decent supply of freeze-dried food for his hiking trips, making sure to buy it every time it went on sale. He stopped in the hall and snagged his first aid kit from the closet. Then he moved the towels aside and pulled down the box that held his target pistol. Sure, it was only a .22 caliber weapon, but all it should take was 1 bullet to the brain. He was fairly certain that he was ready to go, but something nagged him in the back of his mind. After puzzling over it for a moment, he chalked it up to his conscience. After all, he was abandoning one of his best friends. In his defense, if this was a zombie apocalypse, it was every man for himself. That was just a sad reality. Shouldering the pack and grabbing the carry bag he had loaded with food, the first aid kit, and 3 full canteens, Bill ducked through his kitchen and made a beeline for the door that opened to the garage. The voice in his head screamed its warning as he pulled the door open. Bill had been at the grocery store when his cell phone started going crazy with messages from people who were sending him those first videos from YouTube. He had been watching a particularly nasty one, taken from way too close, of a pair of women tearing a screaming child limb from limb. When he pulled into the garage, he hadn't hit the remote to shut the door. "Oh, Jessie!" was all he managed before the girl he'd spent many nights fantasizing about. Sometimes while being able to hear her and Carl, due to one of their bedroom windows being left open. Lunged forward and clamped her teeth down on his lower lip and chin. They fell back, bodies intertwined in a way Bill had imagined, albeit somewhat differently. The pain was unlike anything he had ever experienced as his lower lip ripped away, along with a piece of meat from his chin. Through the flood of tears, he saw the blurry figure that had to be Carl stumble into view, along with at least 4 more. Bill's pack made him as awkward as a turtle on its back. He kicked to no avail. Even worse, as he inhaled to scream, a gush of blood sucked into his lungs. Bill Wright shuddered a few times, and then was still. The pack of undead crouched over him began to disperse. A moment later, his eyes opened. Unfortunately for Bill Zombie. He was even more uncoordinated and defenseless now. His legs bicycled and his arms reached for a purchase that would never appear. Portland, Oregon. Lucas pushed the mop back and forth, paying no real attention to what he was doing. His earbuds blasted the newest Avenged Sevenfold cut, effectively blocking out the rest of the world. The music allowed him to endure what was just another in a string of crappy jobs. This one, in its third week, was fast approaching record-breaking status. 3 more days, and yes, ladies and gentlemen, we'd have a winner. Dunking the mop in the long overdue to be refreshed water that half-filled his wheeled yellow bucket, Lucas plunged it up and down a few times, slopped it into the wringer, slammed down on the handle, wringing maybe half of the liquid from the gray-black strands, then jerked it out, sending the fetid fluid in a splattering arc across the cold concrete floor. He resumed sloshing the mop back and forth, occasionally blurting out a few off-key, nasally lyrics. Finishing up, he carried the bucket over to the deep sink and emptied the filthy water down the drain. He gave the bucket a cursory rinsing, then hung the still dripping, unrinsed mop on the wall, and slid the bucket under the sink. Stuffing his hands in his pockets, he came out with his baggie, some papers, and a lighter. One bad thing about looking for a job was the 3 or 4 weeks he had to go without smoking weed. Never knew if a UA was going to be requested. He quickly rolled a joint and lit up. This was probably why his current job had lasted so long. Working for this contracted cleaning company, Lucas always volunteered for the warehouses. He had no problem finding a nice spot away from everybody where he could take the edge off the workday. If any of the folks on his crew noticed, nobody said anything. Hell, most of his co-workers were fresh out of jail or prison. Didn't those types have some code against being a snitch? That total feeling of relaxation was seeping through his body when the creepiest scream he ever heard managed to break through the guitars blazing in Lucas's ears. His thumb found the volume wheel as the scream seemed about to die, only to explode again with renewed intensity. Climbing to his feet, he made his way to a door that opened out onto the loading platform of the warehouse. Plucking both buds out, he could better hear as the screaming slowly faded to some other sound that came through the steel door in muffled fits. "Yo, man, you all right?" Lucas pushed the bar, opening the door. A smell so thick that it seemed to fill his mouth with a greasy film met him in place of the normal cool night air. 2 people were crouched on the ramp leading up to one side of the concrete platform. A yellowish light flickered just above them from a thin metal pole. A third person, it looked like Jimmy Jenkins, was sprawled on the ground. The weak whimper, rising and falling in pitch, was coming from him. One of the crouching figures turned its head at the sound of the door. The scene before Lucas was unimaginable. It made no sense to the young man who gazed upon it. Aaron Milburn was staring up from Jimmy's body. His face was smeared with a dark wetness that dripped from his chin in pencil-thick ropes. Something large and jelly-like dropped from Aaron's open mouth, landing with an audible splat on the concrete. "What the?" was all Lucas could manage around the bile rising in his throat. Aaron pulled himself to his feet like an old wino. He was staggering slightly, one leg seemingly on the verge of collapse. One step forward, fully into the light, revealed the reason. His coveralls had been torn open from hip to knee on the right leg. Strips of meat hung over the torn khaki, which was itself stained a dark, blackish color, obviously from all the blood. For just a second, Lucas thought he caught a glimpse of what could have been bone from the depths of the wound. Holy shit! Lucas reached behind himself for the door. His hand found the handle, and he pushed the lever with his palm. The door opened out towards him, causing Lucas to turn his back slightly, to step around and into the relative safety of the warehouse. A hand curled around the door before he could pull it shut. The dull thud was accompanied by a series of crunching noises from the breaking of fingers between door and jamb. The fingers still continued to clutch the door, attempting to pull it back open. Another set of fingers joined the first, adding to the force being applied to open the metal door. Lucas wasn't even considering the option of waiting around or checking anybody out to see if they were okay. His mind was struggling with the idea of what exactly was happening. There was definitely something wrong. That was really the only thing of which he was certain. Running through the warehouse to the front exit, he dodged a few odd stacks of aluminum, giving dark spaces a wide berth. He heard the clang of the door once, twice, a third time. Reaching the front exit, Lucas turned the knob and bolted through the doorway, right into a hulking figure that could only be Travis Reynolds. Of all the crew, Travis was the only one you could look at and know he'd done prison time. His upper body was gigantic. He had muscle packed onto his well over 6-foot-tall frame from the waist up. His gut was equally huge, but as solid as a rock. Both arms were tatted with designs that related to naked women and white power. His head was shaved and sat on a neck that you could not find without close inspection. Travis sported a long goatee that he kept braided into a distinct fork. What finished off the look were legs that, if Travis wore shorts, looked like a pair of toothpicks sticking out of a potato. Lucas careened off the body of Travis Reynolds and flipped over the metal railing that ran across the front of the raised entrance. He hit the asphalt of the parking lot, and the air left his lungs in a sudden and painful rush. Try as he might, Lucas could not get himself to inhale. He lay sprawled, making weak, croaking noises.
"What the fucking hell is going on, Lucas?"
Travis looked down over the railing with his usual scowl of disdain. More croaking. Having never experienced the wind being knocked from him, Lucas was quite scared. He reached up, trying but failing to form any words. Tears streamed down his cheeks, a combination of fear and pain.
"Man up, you pussy!"
Travis walked along the landing to the steps, alternately scolding Lucas for being so weak, and demanding to know where the rest of the crew had gone.
"Can't find fucking anybody. That jig Aaron must be hiding from work, as always. You smell like a 2-bit bag of weed, and Jemmy fucking Jenkins is likely getting his knob polished by that meth whore Wendy."
Reaching down with a ham-sized fist, Travis yanked Lucas onto his feet by the collar. As soon as he let go, Lucas slid back down on his ass, still struggling to get even the tiniest amount of oxygen into his lungs.
"Walk it off, man."
The main door to the warehouse rattled, and then slowly began to open. Out onto the landing stumbled Aaron Milburn, Jimmy fucking Jenkins, and a third man neither Lucas nor Travis recognized.
"What the—"
Travis's voice trailed off, choked by a gag as the stench from the three figures caught him full force. He staggered back a couple of steps, and all three heads snapped his direction, like birds spotting a juicy worm. In the bluish-white fluorescent glow of the walkway and parking lot lighting, it was much easier to see the horrific figures that were now staggering his way. All three bodies were missing chunks, literal chunks of meat. The corpse of Jimmy Jenkins had the added horrific effect of strands of intestine hanging in bunches from a gaping hole just below the bottom of the ribcage. Travis glanced at Lucas, then at the abominations making slow but steady progress in his direction. He continued to back slowly away.
You best get to your feet.
Lucas reached out, his eyes pleading for help. Setting his back against the cool, smooth concrete, he pushed with his legs, trying to wedge his body up. His progress was slow, coming inch after agonizing inch. He tried again, desperately, to suck air in, and once more managed only a feeble squeak. But it was a little better. Some air actually found its way.
Travis?
He could barely manage. In unison, all three heads snapped in Lucas's direction, forgetting all about Travis, who continued to back slowly towards the parking lot. Reaching the bottom of the gently inclined ramp that had been put in for handicapped access, the trio turned and made for the closer prey. Lucas willed himself forward. He was hunched over as if he'd been punched in the gut. In fits and starts, he tried to follow Travis. A hand clutched his collar, much as the large man had done seconds before when hauling Lucas to his feet. Only this time it didn't jerk or snatch, it simply pulled. Lucas fell back as hands clutched him on wrists, shoulders, and even hair. He tumbled, bringing two of the three with him. He found himself staring up into dead faces with open mouths. One of those mouths came down on his nose and bit hard, crushing cartilage and ripping away not only the nose, but a strip of flesh under the right eye. Travis continued to watch as he backed away. He saw the bodies tumble to the ground in a heap. Then two of those things climbed on top of that Lucas kid. He must have gotten his wind back, because as Travis turned to run, he heard a scream of absolute agony. Juan Hoya pulled his coat up over his face. The dull thud sounded again. If there was anything that he hated more than being woke up, he couldn't think of it. Thud. There it was again. It was probably some damn wino from the park blocks come up to the university area looking for better pickings. Well, he would just have to set whoever it was straight. This was his street, and if somebody was gonna bang on his car, then he'd damn sure give them some attention. Jerking away the coat he slept under in the back seat of the Oldsmobile Cutlass he had called home for the past 8 months, Juan sat up. His hand reached for the aluminum baseball bat he kept close by for emergencies. A face stared in, pressed against the glass of the back seat passenger window.
Get the fuck out of here!
Juan yelled, making a threatening lunge. Whoever it was didn't seem fazed. Instead, a meaty hand slapped against the window. The face pressed closer, smearing a film of something on the glass. Juan reached behind himself and unlocked the door. Whoever this was, they were about to get mopped. Scooting backwards and hoisting his legs around, his feet hit the cold asphalt. Rising to unfold his 6'2" frame, Juan shivered slightly from the chill. Now he was even angrier. He hated being cold almost as much as he hated being woke up. It would take forever to warm his feet up again. The sudden impact of the smell that filled his nostrils caused him to gag, and lose just a bit of steam. He felt last night's 40-ouncer surge up from his stomach and reach the back of his mouth. He swallowed hard as he spun to face this lame-o who had messed up a good night's sleep. "You need to drag your drunk ass down to the river and clean up," Juan snarled. The wino was staggering around the back of the car, reaching out for him with outstretched hands. If he was looking for money or help, this drunk had come to the wrong place. A quick glance around confirmed there was nobody near. One good crack in the head, and this guy could sleep it off in the dumpster a few blocks away. "Another step and I'm going to crack that dome of yours." Juan tightened his grip and drew back, prepared to swing big if this guy didn't beat feet in another direction. The smell grew stronger as this thing drew nearer with each labored step. Things had gone far enough for Juan Hoya. He swung the bat, connecting solid with the cheek of this staggering bag of stench. Its head rocked back and to the right, yet it staggered only slightly more than it had been already. Juan blinked in disbelief as this guy took another step towards him, now clearing the rear of his car and the shadows. For the first time, he got a good look at the person who had not only woke him up, but took one of his best shots only to be apparently unfazed. What he saw seemed impossible. This guy's throat was torn out. Not just a little gash, no, it was ripped open so far that you could see inside. Blood was all down the front of this guy. His eyes were sorta milky and bloodshot, but not. It was like this guy's blood was black or something. "That's tight," Juan breathed. Of course, it was creepy, but it was also the coolest thing he had ever seen. The ripped open neck, however, was not tight. The thing continued to come at him. Juan swung again, connecting with the temple. This time it staggered, stumbled. He brought the bat down on the back of its skull. A satisfying crunch that he could feel as well as hear was the result. Still, this thing tried to come up from its hands and knees. With everything he had, a series of 3 more swings brought the thing down to stay. The skull burst open, spilling its contents in a wide, splattered arc across the asphalt. "Now that's tight like a tiger," he snorted, admiring his handiwork. A sound up the street by the pizza place jerked his attention away from the body at his feet. His heart began racing at the possibility of a witness to his crime. He sighed in relief as he made out one of the whores that worked the area. Latricia. The stagger was oddly similar to the guy laying in the gutter with his brains spilled every place. He had walked that same jerky, unnatural way. More like a bird than a person, Juan decided. 2 more figures came around the same corner. But it was weird. They would take a few steps past the building on the corner, then just freeze. Their heads would snap his way, and then the bodies would slowly come around in the direction the heads pointed. Then, in that strange, jerky walk, they began moving towards him. As the trio made their way closer, they entered a large circle of light cast by the regularly placed street lamps that alternated sides in both directions. All 3 were covered in what had to be blood. One of them looked like it was missing half an arm. Juan considered what he was seeing for a moment. This was like one of those movies. Something about dead. Zombies? But that couldn't be, could it? He watched those things get even closer. There was the first hint of that gagging smell. So if he was right, and these things were zombies... Hefting the bat, Juan rushed the whore. She was a good 20 feet ahead of the other two. As he circled around, her head followed in jerky, bird-like fits. Teasingly, he dangled his hand towards the open mouth of whatever the hell this thing was. A lunge and the click of teeth sounded as he jerked back. This could be tight. He went to work with his bat, taking out a leg, connecting with the left knee so hard that the leg folded back. Still it came. A whirling overhead spin connected with the other leg, shattering the shin. Still it came, dragging itself with outstretched arms. Never once did it scream. By darting in and out, pretty soon all three had been denied the use of their legs. Like nightmarish paraplegics, they dragged themselves after Juan. The only sounds were moans that ranged from a squeaky sound to the low, guttural sort. This could mean all kinds of stuff. If it was like the movies... He walked back to his car and grabbed his knapsack. With a nudge, he closed the door. He had to take a look around and see if this was everywhere. If it was, he'd find a new car. Preferably one that actually started and ran. A few minutes later, Juan Joya was headed for the heart of downtown. 4 bodies lay sprawled out, unmoving, heads reduced to a mass of gore on the street. 15 minutes later, he stood on the 6th floor of a parking garage. In every direction he saw them, some alone, some in groups. Across the street was a department store. Never in his life had he been able to consider shopping in that place. He wouldn't even shoplift there. As soon as he walked in, he knew damn good and well that security would be watching every step he took. Leaning against the bumper of the Corvette he had hot-wired, Juan rested his aluminum bat on one shoulder. A whole bunch of cop cars had sped by with lights flashing and sirens blaring just a couple of minutes ago. Most likely, they would be real busy for quite some time. They wouldn't be able to come check out a little store alarm for a while. Now would be the perfect time to bust in, grab some stuff, and then get the hell away from the city before sunrise. "Tight," Juan whispered as he opened the door to his new Corvette. He revved the engine, feeling the power surge vibrating the entire car. "Tight like a tiger." San Diego, California. Melissa grabbed her gym bag. On her way past the mirrors, she stopped for one last look. At least 40 pounds. Damn, she was starting to look good. A couple more months and she would come to the gym during normal hours. Walking out of the women's locker room, she noticed Phil, the graveyard shift front desk guy, and a couple of others gawking up at the television. She couldn't see the picture, but imagined it was probably the Girls Gone Wild infomercial. For the first 7 months that she had been coming to this gym at 2 a.m. sharp, nobody had so much as mumbled an incoherent word her direction. That had started changing about 3 weeks ago. One night she had come back in because, like a ditz, she had left the lights on in her car. The battery was stone cold dead. She had cables, but she needed a jump. When she walked in, Phil and a couple of the late-night regulars were having quite a laugh. "An ass the size of a really big sumo wrestler!" One of the guys, Richie, she thought was his name, was howling. "Yeah, and did you ever catch a whiff before she headed to the showers? Phil made gagging noises. Like rotten armpit and Limburger cheese. Another laughed. She hadn't known his name yet. Yeah. Phil was still waving his hand in front of his face. Can you imagine the funk from that coochie? Ain't probably seen action in 20 years, Richie crowed. Yes, they were all having a great laugh. And Melissa knew at whose expense. She wanted to turn around and run out the door. She would walk home. The warmth in her face let her know that she was blushing deeply. But it was the next sentence that caused that warmth to spread throughout her body. And it came from Phil. But damn! That girl has busted ass every single night! I even started checking the register on my off days. She hasn't missed a night in over 8 months. A few more months and I might even tap that, Richie added. Melissa hadn't heard another word. That was the closest thing to a compliment she'd had directed her way since before the miscarriage. Since before she managed to pack 200 pounds on her 5-foot frame. One day she had looked in the mirror and not recognized the face staring back. That had been it. She went on a rampage, lugging garbage bags of junk from cupboards in the refrigerator to the dumpster. Next, she joined the gym up the street at the strip mall that also housed an ice cream shop and hot tub outlet. After a week, the stairs and Snickers became too much. Thankfully, the gym was a 24-hour place. She started coming at 2 a.m. That night, Richie had come out and jumped her car for her. Then, in the back seat, he had tapped that. She drove home that night with the unfamiliar sensation of semen trickling down her thighs. The next night, she found out that the guys wanted to help her. All of a sudden, she had 5 personal trainers. Not being stupid, she knew why. For the next few weeks, she also had an escort to the parking lot. That came to an end when it was suggested that perhaps 2 guys should walk her out. Melissa refused. No amount of persuasion could sway her. Truthfully, she'd grown bored with them. She was almost ready for bigger game. There was this really cute single guy in her apartment complex. His name was Jamie. He had been nice to her even when she was huge. Not in any sort of way that indicated interest, yet lately his gaze lingered longer. There was a look in his eyes that Melissa had never seen before. Not directed at her, anyways. Desire. She had the meatheads at the gym to thank for that. She quickly figured out who was walking her to the car, each night by the way they looked at her. There was a difference in how Jamie looked at her versus how the guys at the gym did. There was a softness in his eyes and a genuine smile. None of the guys in the gym ever smiled, and not once in the back seat had she been face to face with her paramour du jour. She just knew it would be different with Jamie. She opened the glass door. A cool night breeze washed over her still warm from the shower skin, causing goosebumps to well up and down both arms. Something else came on the wind. A smell. Melissa stepped out on the walkway and turned towards the parking lot. A row of hedges had walled off the gym ever since the women's aerobics class had complained about the gawkers. That was 4 years before Melissa joined. As she stepped around the hedge, that smell poured over her like rancid oil, seemingly clinging to her skin, filling her mouth and nose, burning her eyes. Standing right in front of her was Jamie. Only something was fundamentally wrong. His eyes, once bright and full of good-natured warmth, were now milky, empty, and laced with a darkness. Even in the false light that shone bluish-white from above, Melissa could see that he was empty of any of that inner light that made Jamie who and what she knew. His hand rose to her shoulder, the fingers closed with vice-like tightness. She looked at the arm to where a large chunk was missing in the middle. Dark blood had dried all the way to the wrist. Something inside her wanted to scream, but she had forgotten how to all of a sudden. A war raged in her mind. Run!
He came for me.
Scream!
Jamie is here.
His other hand found her other shoulder. He moved close, his mouth open. As their bodies came together, Melissa felt something wet and thick against her bare knees. She knew that if she looked down, the spell would pop like a soap bubble. There was something wrong about the wet, rope-thick coils that smeared against the day-old stubble on her legs. His mouth was almost to hers now. That smell could not be coming from him, not Jamie. He was here to finally reward her hard work and sacrifice. Their mouths came together. In her mind, Melissa had pictured this very moment countless times. The sudden agony was like a bucket of cold water. She jerked back and forth, trying desperately to free herself of the source of such pain. She felt her tongue rip and tear away. Blood filled her mouth and throat, causing her to cough and choke. She struggled against the hands on her shoulders and fell back onto her butt. Fingernail marks scored her shoulders, and the t-shirt hung in 2 pieces around her waist. She saw Jamie for what he really was, or what he had become. 2 thick, intestinal strands hung to his thighs from a rip across his abdomen. Bite-sized pieces were missing from both arms, and his shirt was torn, not only at his stomach, but the left side of his chest as well, where another chunk had been taken. Melissa wanted to scream, but only choked. Using her hands, she tried to scoot back, away from the horror that stood above her. Jamie's body lunged at her awkwardly and landed with his face burying itself in one still large breast. She felt his mouth open wide, teeth brushing her skin, then more pain. His mouth closed and tore, bringing away a wad of cotton sports bra, as well as flesh. The pain was brutal, but Melissa was drowning. Drowning on the blood she kept sucking into her lungs with every attempt to scream. Another bite into her flesh, and blood erupted from her open mouth in a red, hot, sticky geyser. She felt hands tearing at the loose, soft skin of her stomach. Her scream finally came in the form of a weak, mewling gurgle. The remnants of her tongue and lower lip flapped, and blood splattered her face. The light seemed to dim, and Melissa knew that she was dying. The pain slowly changed to a dull warmth. Darkness came. "You sure this isn't some sort of joke?" Richie stared at the television over Phil's shoulder. "Ain't seeming to be." Phil watched the grainy footage that kept running on a loop while the commentator announced the grim news. "As of yet, the White House has made no comment other than to deny that this crisis is terrorist-related. Word of savage outbreaks like those reported earlier are now coming in from all around the globe. There has been no word from the CDC that confirms internet rumors of the dead reanimating, They were, however, quick to discount what they deemed an overactive cluster of horror movie fanatics creating a story to satisfy an adolescent fantasy. Dr. Linda Singh had this to say at the latest CDC press briefing. A middle-aged woman with short, dark hair appeared on screen with her name and title just above the news ticker. Her pale skin looked even more washed out under the lights. This was exaggerated further by the fact that she wore absolutely no makeup. Those rumors of the dead coming back and attacking the living are beyond ludicrous. Ignoring the pure physiological impossibility, there is simply no way this can be considered with any seriousness.
You believe this?
Said Jerry, another of the regulars, and the one who the others had blamed for their free piece of ass cutting them off. He'd been the first to suggest that Melissa accommodate two of them at one time.
This is like some War of the Worlds shit.
Phil laughed, unconvincingly. The electronic pulse tone sounded, announcing somebody entering or exiting the gym. Jerry, Phil, and Richie looked at one another with hopeful smiles. Simultaneously, they all called out in a lusty sing-song.
Melissa.
Shoving Phil into Richie, Jerry got the jump. He had been in a real dry spell, with the exception of those walks out to the car with Melissa. Since the night she'd announced it was over, he'd been forced to go solo, and he always struggled with that Catholic-induced shame afterwards. Running around the corner into the big entry foyer, Jerry noticed a stench unlike anything in his life. It made his protein farts smell like fresh mountain air. Holy! He was unable to finish the next word as his latest power drink exploded from his mouth and nose in a bile-mixed spray of watery vomit. The smell was bad, but it was the apparition standing just about 10 feet away that turned his guts to searing jelly. As the vomit sprayed from seemingly every orifice in his head, both his bladder and bowels let go. All this took place in a matter of seconds. What remained of Melissa stood in the middle of the lobby. Another figure was just behind her, and he, Jerry was pretty sure it was a he, seemed to be stuck in the door, or at least what had to be his intestines were. The guy was trying to pull free, but only managed to have more of the gray-pink coils spooling out from the hole in his guts. Melissa looked little better. She was covered in blood. Her entire abdomen was hollowed out into a crimson cavern of raw, dangling viscera. Enough of her ribcage showed to reveal that a couple of bones had been snapped off. Remnants of her overlarge breasts hung in tatters. But her face was what broke Jerry's mind. The lower jaw remained awkwardly attached. All of the left cheek and most of the right had vanished. The mouth hung open to reveal a blackish stump that had to have been her tongue at one point. The eyes were coated in some sickly film and bloodshot in black.
Fuck!
Phil and Richie breathed almost in unison. They arrived to see two equally terrifying events happen at practically the same time. Melissa lunged forward, catching Jerry's hand in her mouth, biting off 3 fingers. And the man in the door jerked forward suddenly, ripping away from his own insides, that now hung from the door and lay in a pile on the rubber mat that people had wiped their feet on when entering. The smell in the air was so bad that neither man who stood right behind Jerry ever knew the other had soiled his pants. Nobody heard the screams, the begging, the crying. Phil had the worst of the 3. When he and Richie had turned to run, he stumbled over a flat bench and hit his head hard enough to lose consciousness. he awoke to 4 zombies feasting on him. He died screaming as he watched his own insides being pulled from his body. Somewhere in the central interior of Australia, the old man sat cross-legged, facing the slowly setting sun. The cataracts over both eyes had stolen his vision more than 40 years ago. Not that the old man knew how long an actual calendar year was. Many that came to see the old man guessed him to be comfortably over 100. They came with questions, as had their parents, as had their grandparents. The old man would listen to the question. Then he would draw in the dirt with a stick. He always continued to look straight ahead, and as he drew, he would smile. His smile was little more than a dark crease in his weathered, wrinkled, tree-bark-textured skin. People would look at the picture, and somehow it would answer their question or give a solution to a dilemma. The old man never asked for money. People simply gave food. Sometimes tribal groups would come and repair the old man's hut and stock him with supplies. Once, long ago, a commune showed up in a bunch of beat-up vans and set up around the old man. They planted gardens and installed a water pump. They never asked any questions. They only wanted to be near his aura. One day, they just left. The old man never spoke. Sometimes he hummed songs that nobody knew. His face never changed expression, except to smile when he drew. That was until 2 days ago. The images that came so easily and often suddenly stopped. Now there was only one overwhelming image: the sun, with a jagged black tumor visible in its center, facing a bloody moon with a bite out of it. The feeling he got from this vision was cold. Death. The old man realized that in his vision he was in the heavens between the sun and moon. When he looked down, he knew he would see Earth, but he could not look down. The old man was afraid. He knew what he would see. Death. Slowly, the old man rose to his feet. He gathered a stick for walking, a leather bag for water, and a pouch of dried berries. He had to leave. He must go deeper into the nothingness of the desolate country where man did not tread. Mankind was dying. He had to get as far away from mankind as possible. His time was running out, and none of the machines or big buildings could help now. Earth, Gaia, nature, whatever you call it, it was resetting itself. The old man suddenly saw visions in his mind, coming so fast that they all bled together. The planet had been scarred and ravaged by mankind, who was brushing everything away. Wars raged, and mankind sought to dominate itself. Mankind could not realize that it could no more dominate itself than one toe on one foot can control the other toes. The old man smiled at his realization. The planet would use the only thing mankind understood to bring it down: death. Eastern Ridge Prison, Idaho. Dylan Clay lay on his bunk. The light from the 3-inch wide by 2-foot long horizontal window bathed his 10-by-8 cell with cool, soft, bluish light. The intercom had called lockdown about an hour ago. Still no CO had come by to count him. Dylan didn't like things he did not understand. There was always a count at lockdown. Something must really be popping off in one of the blocks. The rest of Tier A seemed just as anxious. There was a lot of yelling going on up and down the block. That was also out of the ordinary. Usually the CO on the tier would come down on people for making a racket during lockdown. Yep. Something was not right.
Clay!
A voice hissed. It was the kid across the hall, Ian Lotherman. He had moved in about 5 months ago. Real sad story. Nothing any real man couldn't understand. The kid had come home early one night to find his new wife of just 3 months with her mouth full of another man's pull. Now they were both dead, and Ian was doing life without.
What?
How come we haven't been counted?
Ian asked. Probably had some block go off the hook. That seemed to satisfy the kid, because he was quiet again. Dylan, however, was not convinced by his own words. He'd seen some real crazy shit in his 23 years down. The COs were just as particular about routine as he was. Any time there was a lockdown, there was a head count. That was just the way things were. Lights. The sudden illumination caused an uproar. Men up and down the tier cursed. Sounds of boots rushing down the concrete-floored tier came even as the main door was still opening with its mechanical whine. Another sound carried on the wind. Gunfire. Several of the prison's correctional officers rushed by wearing full riot gear. None of them even glanced in Dylan's cell as they passed. The two bringing up the rear had pistol-gripped shotguns and were pointing back the way they had come. Now guys were really yelling. At the head of the tier, where the door leading out to the common room had locked open with a loud metallic clang, there was a sudden change in the timbre of the voices. It was no longer the gruff, harassing sound of boisterous convicts. Terror. Fear. Absolute horror.
What the hell is going on, Clay?
There was definite fear in Ian's voice. The kid had his tall, lean frame pressed against his cell door. His eyes were wide, and his hands held on in a white-knuckled grip on the round bars.
Get away from your door, kid.
Something's happening up the tier.
His face was turned now as he strained to look up the long, 5-foot-wide concrete tunnel.
Get away from the door.
Dylan Clay knew the smell of death. On the streets he had stumbled across the occasional wino that had spent a few days rotting unnoticed in an alley or under a bridge. He'd killed a few rival dealers. Once or twice one of his girls would turn up dead in a motel room where some John had gotten rough or decided not to pay. Yes, Dylan Clay was familiar with the smell of death. Death was on the tier. Something was wrong, though. This smell had something more. Whatever it was had grown street-hardened convicts screaming, begging. One scream was coming through above all the others. It was a scream of unbridled pain. Boom! The explosion of a shotgun echoed up and down the tier. The acrid smoke filled Dylan's nostrils, but it did not hide that stench of death. Twice more shotguns blasted, drowning the screams, drowning the sound of the door at the rear of Tier A opening, but not the vibration. The rear door only opened in case of emergency. Or, since there had never actually been one, more correctly, during a fire drill.
Get away from the door, Ian.
Dylan's voice had not changed. It had not raised or lowered, yet Ian heard the message clearly. He let go of the bars as if they had suddenly been charged with electricity. He stepped back, stumbling slightly as his legs contacted the stainless steel toilet and sink unit that jutted out of one wall. The smell grew stronger. Men were gagging, retching, and spewing the contents from their stomachs. A silence far more deafening than the screams or shotgun blasts was washing down the tier like a tsunami. A body came into view in front of Dylan's cell. It was a CO, but he wasn't in riot gear. He was wearing what was left of the standard uniform. Gray button-up shirt, black khaki pants, and dull, unpolished boots. Blood was everywhere, turning the gray to black in places. The head was tilted at an awkward angle, exposing a long, jagged rip down the left side of the neck.
What the?
Ian gasped. With a jerk of its head, the creature on the tier turned towards the sound. Thick blood oozed from the rip and trickled along the collar of its shirt. A pregnant drop hung for a second before falling with a splat on the buffer-polished concrete. It lunged forward, gliding hard with the bars. Two more figures stepped into view and followed the first. Dylan couldn't see their faces to attempt and identify just exactly who these things once were, but he had a sick feeling he knew what they were.
Stay in the back of your cell,
Dylan yelled.
What the hell is going on?
Dylan could hear the edge of hysteria in the young man's voice. Like a contagion, that hysteria seemed to suddenly spread through the tier. Screams for somebody to open the doors or to simply help began in earnest. Grabbing a shirt from his open locker, Dylan had a plan. He yelled, gaining the attention of what he knew had to be a zombie. Sure enough, it came to his bars, hands outstretched. Both its arms reached into his cell. The zombie's face pressed against the bars, teeth gnashing. Pulling his belt out of the jeans he was wearing, Dylan took stock of just how this thing moved as he fashioned a noose. Like a snake, he struck, catching both arms at the wrist with the belt and cinching tight. Pulling down, he brought the arms across one of the crossbars, with a loud crack. Both arms bent unnaturally at the elbows as he quickly came down with all his weight to sit on the floor. He secured the belt to a lower bar and then grabbed the T-shirt. This part would be a bit tricky. Stepping up to the door, fighting down the bile in the back of his throat, Dylan took a wrap around one hand with the T-shirt and swung the dangling portion of the shirt, catching it as it dropped behind the head of what he now recognized as C.O. Johnson. Again he yanked with both arms, falling back and bringing the shirt through the bars. It was secure against the back of the neck of the abomination. Quickly he tied the loose ends of the shirt together, securing the head against the bars. Dylan stepped back to admire his work. The thing was helpless, for the most part. It was struggling, trying to pull away while its mouth snapped fiercely. A low, moaning snarl came from the zombie that had once been C.O. Johnson. Picking up his combo lock, Dylan dropped it in a sock and wound up. He swung, bringing his makeshift bludgeon down on the head of the creature. Again and again he swung, sometimes deflecting off the bars, but eventually he accomplished his goal, breaking open the skull of this thing. He looked across the tier. At some point, Ian had figured out what Dylan had done. A second beast was splayed against the kid's cell door bars, hanging limply. The third zombie had wandered off. With both doors to the tier open, distant sounds of gunfire and screaming could be heard. Dylan hit the button on his sink and began to wash up. In his mind, he was taking an inventory of the food in his locker. He had gone to Canteen the morning before and bought 100 rack. He wondered if things would get as bad as they always did in the movies.
Charleston, South Carolina. Garrett!
the raspy voice barked, followed by a series of shredding coughs.
Get your ass in here and stop gawking at that whore!
Looking over his shoulder into the dark, smoky house, Garrett McCormick tipped the half-empty bottle of beer, draining the contents in 3 huge gulps. Not for the first time today, he allowed the private reel in his mind to spool. Several possible death scenarios played in his imagination, each one ending with Patty McCormick meeting her end at his hands. Nothing as quick and impersonal as a gun would do. He wanted to feel her physically leave her body, breathe her final tobacco-fouled breath into his face. He wanted to see the light fade and finally extinguish from her eyes.
You hear me, boy?
Yes, Mother. Garrett walked back into the house, letting the screen door slam behind him.
Damn it! How many times do I have to tell you about letting that door slam?
Patty McCormick scolded. Sorry, Mama. Garrett opened the fridge and grabbed another beer. He closed the door, twisted the cap off, tossed it on the counter, and lumbered into the living room. Patty McCormick's obscenely obese form took up well over half of the sofa. A tray table sat within reach, scattered with full and half-full ashtrays, an old 1-gallon plastic milk container of sweet tea, and an empty box of Little Debbie Nutty Bars. In one hand, the woman clutched the television remote. In the other, the ever-present cigarette.
Warm me up that macaroni and cheese from last night and check my jar of sun tea on the front porch.
Another series of painful-sounding coughs tore from the woman. After a few wet, hawking convulsions, she swapped the remote for an old faded double-gulp cup and spit a dark wad that seemed reluctant to completely free itself from her pursed lips. Yes'm. Garrett trudged back to the kitchen and pulled the casserole dish out of the refrigerator. He shoved it in the microwave and pushed a few buttons. Shrill laughter drifted in on the warm spring air. Garrett glanced out the grimy window as Kimmy Vanderwall and April Williams emerged from the Vanderwalls' in-ground swimming pool, each girl tilting her head to the side, wringing out their long, wet hair. He stared at their bikini-clad bodies, unconsciously wiping at his mouth with the back of his hand. He felt a stirring, and then the awkward strain of the growing bulge in the crotch of his jeans. He reached down, adjusting slightly to ease the discomfort. It took him a moment to realize he had been holding his breath. It was startled back to a regular rhythm when the microwave screeched to announce that the macaroni and cheese was ready. The 2 girls both shot glances over their shoulder. They had heard. They knew. Kimmy whispered something to April, who responded by making a face. The 2 girls burst out laughing, then vanished through an open sliding glass door into the Vanderwall house.
What's keeping you, boy?
Patty Garrett croaked from the living room, the metallic ratchet of the wheel of her lighter signaling the start of another cigarette. Spooning the gummy orange-yellow mixture onto a plate, Garrett grabbed the bottle of ketchup from the counter and brought lunch to his mother. He set the plate down on the tray table and grabbed the fuller of the 2 ashtrays. He emptied it and replaced it on his way past as he headed out to the front porch to check the sun tea. The street was quiet for a Saturday. Usually, on a sunny spring day like this, kids were riding bikes, playing basketball in a Gibson's driveway, or mowing lawns. The annoying tone of the emergency broadcasting system snapped Garrett out of his stupor. We interrupt this program to bring you the following bulletin. A baritone voice blared from the television. Garrett turned, still standing on the porch, his hulking frame keeping out all but the smallest slivers of light.
Center for Disease Control spokeswoman Dr. Linda Singh has released the following statement.
The photo of a conservative-looking woman with pinched features appeared on the left of an all-blue field. White letters appeared, and the voice announced them verbatim.
Continued claims of the dead reanimating are being investigated. While it is doubtful that this is true, citizens are advised to remain indoors while response teams in your local area can coordinate with national officials in order to contain this, what is now being officially labeled a pandemic.
Garrett listened to the words, but they just didn't make much sense. It sounded bad, that was certain. Also, he became aware that he was hearing an echo of sorts. He turned, looking up and down the street. The same broadcast was pouring from every other open door and window on the block, creating an eerie reverberation.
These statements seem to counter, at least somewhat, the complete denial made by Dr. Singh yesterday. While still not validating the claims of the dead rising, becoming what millions are now referring to as zombies, she has conceded that the CDC is investigating the possibility that these rumors are true.
Quit standing there letting all the flies in!
Patty growled through a mouthful of macaroni and cheese.
Yes'm.
Garrett took the step inside, letting the screen shut against his back. Meanwhile, Patty McCormick was busy flipping through channels. Each one carried the same story in one form or another. She paused on one, and a flood of gibberish blared from the tiny speaker.
Even the damn spicks are babbling about this nonsense!
Don't seem likely.
Garrett scoffed and headed up the stairs to his room, leaving his mother to her macaroni and cheese, television, and chain smoking. He walked down the gloomy hallway to the last door on the right, his bedroom. Closing the door behind himself, he mashed a button on his CD player. The intro to Blue Oyster Cult's Burning for You began. Garrett climbed across his bed and sat on the edge, peering through his partially open curtains. He could spy perfectly down onto the deck and swimming pool in the backyard of the Vanderwall residence. Just as he hoped, a moment later, Kimmy and April came back out. They were looking back over the fence.
Don't worry, whores,
Garrett thought.
I'm not in the kitchen anymore.
Apparently satisfied, April unclasped her bikini top and stretched out on her stomach on a towel. Kimmy was a time-delayed mirror image. The two girls lay head to head, resting their chins on their hands, most likely engaged in useless chatter about which boy they'd be letting finger bang them after school. Garrett chased that unwelcoming voice out from his head as he unzipped his pants and pulled out his already stiff member. His eyes locked on the deep crease in the girls' bikini bottoms. It had been a while, and the act took less than a minute. Unsatisfied, he sat there for several minutes, staring down at the two unsuspecting objects of his dark fantasies. Chapter 3. The Geeks Shall Inherit. Norfolk, Virginia. Darren's fingers flew over his keyboard. He glanced up at his monitor screen, scanning the responses to his last statement. DRK Mystic. I don't care what media says. This is zombies. DM Ninja. I was outside. Me and Coco got it. Knock over, bash it with sledge. Crushed chest. It got up. Crushed head. Warrior 1197. Kilt it? DM Ninja. Yep. DRK Mystic. We need to meet. Away from Pop. NE Body Got Guns? The chat room fell silent.
It would figure, Darren thought. I am the only one with a gun.
Not that it was much, just a .22 that he bought a few years back when he moved into his own apartment. Other than 2 times at a local range, it had never been used. Truth be told, he still had the original box of bullets he purchased the day he picked up his gun, minus 30 rounds. That meant he had 70 bullets. After almost an hour of bickering, the four, Darren DRK Mystic Goldburn, Mike DM Ninja Rathers, Kevin Warrior 1197 Dreon, and Carrie Coco Kolchek, agreed on where to meet. They unanimously rejected downtown Norfolk and instead chose Trashmore Park. It was central to all of them and, more importantly, wide open so they could spot trouble at a distance. Each agreed to load their cars with whatever supplies they felt necessary. Mike and Carrie would be coming in Mike's El Camino, since Carrie didn't own a car. They would meet in 2 hours. Looking out his window, Darren couldn't see anything moving. He had a clear view of the long parking lot. Still, he would have everything by the front door before he started loading up his trusty, but beat-up, Geo Metro. The normal late-night quiet was buzzing with the occasional siren. More ominous were the gunshots. While this was by no means an affluent neighborhood, it was no inner-city gangland. Deep down, Darren knew that things were bad, and it would only get worse. Still, he had questions. Eventually, these things, the zombies or ghouls or whatever you wanted to call them, would run out of food. It was simple mathematics, unless they ate each other. That didn't seem likely. Otherwise, they would already be turning on each other and not walking in these groups that were being reported on the more populated areas. Grabbing the most important bags, Darren stuffed the pistol in his waistband and peered out the peephole to ensure his hallway was clear. He quickly unlocked his deadbolt and opened the door. Down the stairs, 2 at a time, and out to the parking lot he ran. So far, all was clear. Figuring that zombies would have little use for his things, he dropped both duffels by the hatchback and sprinted back to his apartment. It took 6 trips. After the last one, he ran back to make one more walkthrough of his place. His last stop was the breaker box. One by one, he shut everything off. Things were going to get pretty crazy. All public service would likely be gone soon, if it wasn't already. It was only a little thing, but Darren wanted to do all he could to cut down on the coming chaos. Just maybe, his place would not catch fire due to some random event. His last act was to leave the door unlocked. There wasn't much to steal. He had all he deemed valuable. In the movies, somebody was always running, seeking a place to hide. Just maybe, they would find his door and be safe for a minute. Just a minute. Again, he ran down the stairs to his car. The coast remained clear. He unlocked every door and the hatch, sliding the key in the ignition just in case, but not starting the engine. No sense making unnecessary noise. He began loading up. As the last box of food was fit into place, he heard a distant scream, followed by gunshots. He considered seeking out the source, but decided that there would be lots of bad things happening in the next few days. Weeks. Forevers. And he couldn't stop them all. The best thing would be to just go and meet up with his friends. Safety in numbers. A few minutes later, he was on the freeway. While the roads were still mostly empty, there was definitely more traffic than normal for this hour. Every passing police car had lights flashing and seemed to be in a big hurry to get someplace. Darren considered things as he saw them. A completely unprepared for, only in the movies scenario was unfolding. Most of the initial responders to the crisis would be police, fire, and maybe military. They would die in large numbers, at least early on. This would eliminate most of the authority figures. So, what would be left? His exit came, and eventually he found himself pulling into the Trashmore Park parking lot. He was the first to arrive. A slow drive-through revealed that, by appearances at least, there was no immediate danger. Nothing shambling about, looking to take a bite out of him. Kevin slowed as the neon lights of the pawn shop came into view. He knew for certain that the guys would be waiting, but he also knew that things were about to get crazy. He'd be damned if he was going to wait for absolute chaos to set in. Somebody was going to have to break the first egg. Or, in this case, window. Pawn shops had guns. He had considered going to an actual gun shop, but most likely there would be pretty intricate security. In a couple days, when all hell had broken loose, they could hit one of those places. Tonight would be like practice. How fast could he get in and out? He pulled into the empty parking lot. The place was dark inside, a good sign. He parked in front of the large plate glass window. King's Pawn. Clever. Grabbing the brick that sat on the passenger's seat, Kevin took one more look around. All was still clear. Leaving the engine running, he walked up and cupped his hand to the window to take a look in. Cash register was to the left. Directly behind it was his prize. A sword collection. 2 crossbows. 4 rifles. 1 shotgun. Pistols would probably be under glass in the display counter by the register. Taking a few steps back, Kevin hurled the brick as hard as he could. There was a crash, followed by a loud, ringing alarm bell. Lights flashed inside like strobes. He climbed through the jagged hole and dashed for his prize, or, as was the case, prizes. In 3 trips he had the swords, crossbows, rifles, and shotgun. On the 4th time in, he grabbed a baseball bat from a stand and attacked the glass counter. As he had suspected, the handguns were right there. His plan worked flawlessly, with one exception. No bullets. Well, nothing could be done for that now. He scooped up his prizes. 5 guns. He had no idea what any of them were. They could worry about that later. A case of bolts for the crossbow was the last item he grabbed before running to his car. Throwing everything into the front seat of his Ford Escort wagon. Well, actually, the title was still in his mom's name, and he owed 4 more payments. He took one more look around. Across the street, in one of those coin-eating, do-it-yourself car washes, a lone figure stood under the fluorescent lighting in the middle of Bay 5. Kevin climbed into the car and grabbed one of the swords. He turned the car around and stopped in the exit drive to the pawn shop. He flipped on his high beams and turned the car at an angle that lit up whoever, or whatever, this person was. The head jerked around to face him, followed awkwardly by the body. It was what had once been a young woman. Her long, blonde hair was matted with something dark that Kevin figured was most certainly blood. She had a big, dark stain on her right side, around the shoulder area. That side of her shirt was torn, leaving an exposed breast. Nasty, Kevin breathed. He climbed out of the car as the blonde zombie came stumbling across the 4-lane road. He easily reached the raised strip that acted as a divider, with its shrubs and young trees spaced out perfectly. The closer she got to where he waited, the stronger the gag-inducing stench became. Nothing he'd ever experienced in his life, up to that point, could compare. Hands reached out, and even in the darkness he could see the mouth open. The zombie made a rattling sound that was like a sigh, mixed with a high-pitched growl. Kevin timed his swing, bringing the sword down on the top of the skull. He had considered decapitating the zombie, but remembered a scene from Day of the Dead, when a zombie's head lay in that dark tunnel, eyes darting back and forth. The sword crashed through the skull. Another thing left out in the movies was just how much his hands stung from the impact, or vibration, or whatever. The pain was enough to make him let go of the pommel. The body hit the ground, knocking the sword loose with a clatter as it skittered a few feet away on the road. Shaking the pins and needles from his hands, Kevin scooped up the weapon, wiped it across the back of the zombie at his feet, and headed for the car. Mike and Carrie hauled the last loads to the El Camino. Most of the back end was loaded with camping gear, tent, stove, lanterns, sleeping bags, Jack Daniels. A few moments later, the blue plastic tarp was secured with twine and bungee cords. They left nothing to chance, grabbing shovels, an axe, a pick, and splitting maul. They discussed the possibility of doing the whole mall scenario, but felt there were some definite drawbacks. First, it would be a few days before society degraded to the point where commandeering a shopping mall would go unnoticed. Second, if zombies gathered, it would be like a siege. Eventually, they would need to move, and that never ended well in the movies. Also, there was the rot factor. They had smelled just one of those things, and it was worse than the smell of that tannery they had gone to during a field trip in 5th grade. Large numbers of those things could only be worse. Plus, the food in the malls would eventually go bad, if it didn't just plain run out. For the past 10 minutes they had been debating Carrie's plan. It was inspired by the book he had just finished. So far, Mike could not find any real holes in the logic. "So this father and his son just keep walking?" Mike asked. "Yeah, that's the whole story. But why did they leave that underground bunker? Fear? Habit? Who can be sure? But we have it way better. The world isn't just some wasteland," Carrie explained. "So we snatch up a bunch of seeds and start a farm?" "Mostly. I mean, we'll need to fortify a defense, but if we get out there far enough, it will work. You realize that mountains make lousy locations for farms," Mike said. "I'm not talking the peaks of the Rockies. I'm just saying a place away from most population centers. The reason to be on top of some sort of hill is so we can see what's coming." "Well," Mike tugged on the tarp, ensuring it was held fast. "I'm pretty convinced. I bet Darren will go for it. But Kevin, you think he wants to play road warrior?" Carrie laughed. "Dude, he's always going to those survivalist camps, reading that crazy militia crap about how to live off the grid. Right now, he's probably trying to figure out how to build a still that converts urine to gasoline." The two locked stares for a moment, then burst out laughing. They climbed into the cab of the El Camino, still chuckling. Mike turned the key and the CD player came alive a second later. A guttural guitar carried on the night air, turning quite a few heads. None of the heads' owners could tell you that they were hearing the song Stranglehold. They simply were able to decide that noise meant the source would satisfy their primal desire. To feed. Just as the sun was rising for what would, on the surface, be a bright, clear, warm and sunny day, the group all stood on the highest hill of Trashmore Park, surveying the surroundings. Sirens and gunfire came from every direction. Cars raced by on the nearby expressway. Plumes of dark smoke rose in various locales. It seemed as if events were unfolding rapidly. The EBS loop on all the radio stations was warning folks to stay indoors and not allow anyone inside. The current response was that the event currently happening was a virus or disease. Maybe it was, but not like anything the folks in charge would allow themselves to acknowledge. The sonic roar of a flight of F-16s screamed overhead. In the big picture, they were just one small element of the total chaos. Who would think a global civilization could be dismantled so quickly by something that should have been just as quickly containable? "We need to get out of the city," Carey said to nobody in particular. "Before the martial law crap is called for," Kevin added. They nodded as a group and headed for their cars. Each had a CB radio tuned to Channel 4. Single file, they wound their way to the Virginia Beach Expressway and headed west. Their ultimate destination was South Dakota. Kevin had given everybody a route map he printed up on his computer. There were waypoints in case anyone got separated. Outside of Hampton was a Walmart superstore. Open or not, it would be their first stop. There was a U-Haul rental across the street. It was decided that, again, open or not, they would be acquiring a truck for Carey. He and Mike would handle that, while Darren and Kevin would go shopping. As they exited the freeway, each felt a surge of adrenaline. The area was more deserted than they could have hoped for. Not a car passed them as they drove down Davis Boulevard. Both parking lots were more or less empty, the exceptions being a couple of lone zombies amidst the stray shopping carts in the Walmart lot. Mike and Carey peeled off, and Darren led Kevin into the open concrete expanse in front of the store. Carey had his door open before the El Camino came to a complete stop. A tool bag in hand, he ran to the glass entry door of the main office. Empty. Opening the bag, he produced a glass cutter. Where'd Kevin come up with this crap? It was as if he had spent his life preparing for some sort of apocalypse. Carey attached a suction cup fitted with a handle and cut a large square out of the bottom of the door. No sense busting glass and making a bunch of noise that might attract attention. A few minutes later, he was in the reception area. Climbing over the counter, he looked at the wall of keys on hooks. Mike came up to the door, slightly out of breath. "Went over by a few of the trucks, and a couple heading this way from down the street." "Okay. What truck am I grabbing?" "Z26, Mike said. Carey scanned the board, found the key he was looking for, and rushed to meet up with Mike in the parking lot. As they threaded their way to the truck, the smell of death teased their nostrils on the gentle morning breeze. Jumping in the cab, Carey settled in, turned the ignition. A full tank. So far, so good. Mike was already sprinting back towards the El Camino. He was running in the street to avoid the possibility of something lunging out from between the rows of trucks. Meanwhile, Carey shifted into gear and edged up and over the concrete ridge that surrounded a poorly kept flower bed. The two headed for the front entry to Walmart, where they would meet up with Darren and Kevin. With shopping carts brimming, the two ran down aisles, scooping things from shelves into the big blue plastic baskets. Once a cart was full, they would push it to the entry foyer, grab another, and rush back into the heart of the store. Each had a list with a marked map. Blankets, camping gear, non-perishable food, One cart alone had been filled with an assortment of beef jerky. At some point, Kevin chopped through a door with an axe from the Home and Garden Department.
There's more stuff than we could possibly find room for.
Darren was breathing heavy, unused to any sort of extended physical exertion. Don't have much time left anyways. Kevin came to a halt with a flatbed push cart designed to carry large purchase items, like refrigerators or big-screen televisions.
Why not?
Alarm systems, Kevin said as he waved his arms in the air, like they were all around and in plain sight.
What?
Sure. Didn't you see those panels with the flashing lights?
Not really.
Well, I wouldn't worry too much. Kevin shrugged.
We're stealing a truckload of stuff? An alarm has been going off for who knows how long? And I shouldn't worry?
Cops are plenty busy. Many are still even on the job. Remember Katrina?
The hurricane?
Yeah. Most of the local police force hauled ass. They decided that staring down a big-ass storm wasn't in the job description.
You think a lot have bailed this soon?
Darren asked. Some. More will follow. It should be a few hours before anybody gets around to martial law. By then, we're on the move and way the hell out of town. Darren mulled this over as he ran for another cart. The reasoning all seemed sound. By the time he arrived at the doors, the truck was backing up with the cargo bay door already open. Kevin was attacking the outer doors with a sledgehammer. He had already broken open the first set that led to the giant Sallyport entrance that all these stores felt were necessary. Once everything was loaded into the U-Haul, it sure looked like a lot less in that big open space. The group headed out. The entrance to Walmart looked like an ugly, jagged, gaping maw. Already a couple of zombies were wandering in.
That hotel looks good,
Darren said. Quite frankly, so had the last four they had passed, in his opinion, but His Royal Highness Kevin Dreon had vetoed them for assorted reasons, varying from not remote enough to no second floor. Apparently, he felt they needed to be on the second floor in order to be safe from the zombies. I think you have a winner. Kevin's reply crackled and hissed on the cheap speakers Darren had wired into his two-way.
Well, yippee freaking skippy.
Darren grumbled to his empty car. The four-vehicle caravan pulled into the mostly empty parking lot of the Dewdrop Inn. Kevin was the first out and already entering the lobby by the time the other three had parked.
Did you see those two back up the road?
Carey shuddered as he recalled the image with far too much clarity.
I bet Tom Savini would love to pull something like that off,
Mike said, trying to pretend he wasn't bothered by what he'd witnessed. In the past 4 hours, the foursome had seen firsthand things that put the movies to shame. It was slowly dawning on them that perhaps a real zombie apocalypse wasn't nearly as much fun as they had always imagined. The most recent image that they were each struggling to dismiss, Kevin included, though he would never admit it, even to himself, involved a little boy who couldn't have been any older than 6. Mike was closest in his assumption of what had happened. The young boy hid in his bedroom under the bed and heard his 7-month-old sister being torn apart by his parents. He could not get the sound of those tiny shrieks from his head. It had been quiet for a while. Then he heard the sound of cars. Cars meant people, and people meant a way to escape his parents, who were still wandering around the house, sometimes coming as close as standing right beside the bed he was hiding under. The little boy hadn't seen any sign of his mom or dad for a few minutes, and decided to run for his life.
He got out from under the bed and made it all the way to the front door. Just as he threw it open, his mother, at least that was what she looked like, mostly, stepped out of the kitchen. The boy stepped onto the porch, not watching where he was going. He tripped over his skateboard that his dad was always telling him he needed to put away before he got somebody killed. For probably the first time in history, a parent's over-exaggeration was coming to fruition. The boy stumbled and fell just as his mother stepped out onto the porch. As Kevin, Mike, Darren, and Carrie drove past, they witnessed a small child being pounced on by a woman who was a bloody mess and missing most of one side of her face, including a fair amount of the scalp all the way back to behind the left ear where her husband had locked onto her cheek and torn it away. Even with their windows rolled up, they had all heard the child beg,
Please, Mommy, please stop.
Mike shook the image away, doubting if he would ever close his eyes and not see that scene replayed again and again. He wondered if his mind would ever erase the audio loop that continued to play behind his thoughts, no matter how hard he tried to shut it out. I got us 2 rooms, with one of those doors that opens between them, Kevin announced, shaking the other 3 from their individual thoughts of what they had seen. The old man at the desk doesn't have a clue what's going on. He said he shut off the television last night when the first reports started coming in. Says he thinks it's just a bunch of re-election scare tactics by the president.
Can we just go to our rooms?
Darren asked, trying not to sound like he was scared shitless to be standing out in the open like they were. Yep, Kevin said. Mike is with me, Carrie with Darren. The 4 picked through the bags and let Kevin determine which needed to be up in the rooms, just in case, and which could stay in the vehicles. 30 minutes later, they were entrenched with both televisions on. Mike and Carrie were in the shower, with Kevin standing at the table beside the window and Darren propped up in one of the beds, watching with disbelief as the world came apart at the seams. There's another one, Carrie whispered.
Did that old man get away?
Darren asked from where he sat in the bathroom, because it was the only place without windows. It didn't matter to him that the curtains were shut. He didn't want to be anywhere near some place where he might possibly see another scene like the one he had witnessed 5 days ago. No, Kevin said over his shoulder. He tried to get in his car like an idiot.
Jeez, Treon.
Darren sighed.
Try to at least pretend you have a heart.
That has nothing to do with it, Kevin countered. I told him 3 days ago to move upstairs and stay out of sight. He was too damn stubborn.
Well, this is all interesting.
Mike interrupted the same circular and tired argument that had been going on for the past 3 hours.
I want to hear more about this run to Pittsburgh. I think we can all agree now that we are dealing with zombies. Kevin has proposed that we make a pilgrimage of sorts to the Mecca of the zombie universe. Pittsburgh. I know where the Monroeville Mall is,
Darren chimed. Just a bit east of the big city, Carrie offered. Don't you think I know where the Monroeville Mall is? Kevin snapped. And while it would be cool, can you even begin to imagine how many people probably had the same idea?
Still think it would be cool,
Darren grumbled. Well, we already have the route planned, Kevin added. He had considered the idea. They were fools if they didn't think that he hadn't already given it some mulling over. It just felt like that was a bad choice. Too many others would have thought the same thing, whereas, if his assumptions were correct, everybody would have been getting out of the cities. Killing a few zombies in Pittsburgh would suffice as an appropriate tribute to the man that they had grown up idolizing. After all, that was the point when it came down to it. They had grown up idolizing George Romero, not the Monroeville Mall.
Another pair of military helicopters,
Mike exclaimed, snapping Kevin out of his musings.
I see 'em.
Kevin shook himself free of his contemplations. He watched the pair of sleek, black attack helos swoop down low on the horizon.
Same direction we saw those jets flying earlier.
think they are doing any good?
Mike asked.
If the television, radio, or at least the electricity come back on, I'll say yes. Until then, I'd say they're just spitting in the wind at this point,
Kevin replied.
Did you think it would be this quick?
Darren whispered.
Actually,
Kevin let the curtain drop.
I'm surprised it took this long. I think our society has had its head up its ass so long it couldn't stop a bad case of the sniffles from going global. They refused to see this for what it was until it was way past too late.
So, what's left?
Mike asked. There was a long pause, and the other three all waited expectantly for what Kevin might say, since he had seemed to have all the answers so far. After all, it had been his insistence that they all keep a bug-out bag in case something terrible happened. They had all humored him, but none of them had expected to use it for more than an emergency kit when the next hurricane hit. Us. The plan, and a little side trip to Pittsburgh, Kevin finally said.
I still think it would be cool to hit the Monroeville Mall,
Darren whispered.
Ultimately cool,
Carrie agreed.
You guys would be the first to die if this were the movies,
Mike teased.
Yeah?
Kevin turned back to the window and peeked out the curtain.
Well, just be glad this ain't the movies.
Down below, in the parking lot, the zombie version of the old man who had been at the front desk when they had checked in continued to try and pull his legless body across the cigarette butt-littered parking lot.
I think the turnoff is just ahead.
Kevin keyed his radio a few times to make sure the guys were listening.
Things are getting sticky up here,
Mike replied. There was a definite hint of concern in his voice.
You do realize that the original Dawn of the Dead was set in Philadelphia?
Carrie chirped. Kevin bristled. Just the sound of the guy's voice was starting to get on his nerves. It felt like he had been running his mouth ever since they set out from Trashmore Park.
Sure.
Kevin tried to keep the irritation out of his voice.
But every fan knows Romero was based out of Pittsburgh.
For instance,
Carrie continued like Kevin hadn't said a word,
the mall was in Monroeville. If we really wanted to pay homage to the King of Zombies, we should have gone there and killed a few outside of the JCPenney's, like Peter and Roger.
How many times do I have to tell you guys that this isn't like the movies?
Kevin snapped. Had he been able to see any of the others, he would have seen their mouths moving in sync with his own as he spoke those last 5 words.
I just think...
Mike started, but his transmission ended in a rather unmanly shriek. Kevin's eyes strained to see around the dark green El Camino in front of him.
Holy shit,
he breathed.
Turn around!
Darren screamed.
Where?
Mike's voice was frantic. A puff of gray smoke signaled that Mike had slammed on the brakes almost more noticeably than the taillights that glowed an angry red. Kevin had to yank his steering wheel hard to avoid rear-ending the big green beast that now sat cockeyed across 2 of the 4 lanes. They had come over a rise to discover why there hadn't been any traffic for the past 20 minutes. A large military roadblock stretched across the north and southbound lanes of the interstate. But that wasn't the problem.
There has to be hundreds.
Mike finally spoke.
I don't think we will be seeing Pittsburgh,
Carrie said, seeming more entertained than concerned.
Are there any signs of...
Darren's voice faded. The overcast sky gave everything a darker appearance. Even the newly budding trees looked more gray than green in the midday gloom. A light rain was misting the windshield. Look how torn up some of them are, Kevin said as he opened his car door and stepped out onto the road. Past the roadblock and beyond the carnage, he could see black clouds rolling skyward.
Fires.
Mike had gotten out of his El Camino and walked back to join his friend.
Half of the damn city must be in flames.
Kevin sighed.
They have so much industrial crap in these parts. I wouldn't want to see this place in a few weeks.
A few weeks? Carrie chuckled from behind the 2. Kevin glanced over his shoulder and saw Darren and the pest strolling up with their rifles slung over their shoulders like a couple of yahoos.
I wouldn't want to be anywhere near this place in 5 minutes,
Carrie quipped.
You know what
Kevin began, but was cut off by a low moan. All 4 men turned in the direction of the sound. Each one was thankful in his own mind that he had used the bathroom at the rest area they'd stopped at a little while ago, because each was certain he would have wet his pants. Stumbling their way along the emptiness of the interstate were about 100 zombies. More could be seen making their way down the steep incline that bordered both sides of the vast concrete throughway.
Where are they coming from?
Mike finally asked.
Does it matter?
Carrie replied, already making his way back to the U-Haul. Everybody else quickly followed suit and returned to his vehicle. In an uncoordinated automobile ballet, the 4 vehicles performed U-turns and were eventually all pointed south in the interstate's northbound lane.
Carrie, you and Mike take the lead,
Kevin ordered.
Great,
Carrie complained.
You drag us way the hell out of our way, and now you want me to blaze a trail out of your mess? You have the more sturdy vehicles,
Kevin snapped.
It would be stupid for Darren or me to lead the way in our compact cars. No,
Carrie shot back.
It was stupid coming here in the first place.
Almost as if to emphasize his point, a zombie stepped out in front of the large moving truck and got clipped by the bumper, sending her— Carrie was pretty sure it was a her— flying back into the concrete divider. The body bent back at an awkward angle that he was pretty certain the human spine was not capable of, and was still. No, wait. A pair of arms reached skyward. Of course, zombie or not, nobody was going to have use of their legs after having their back broken like that, Carrie thought.
Mike?
Kevin was still talking, still giving orders, much to Carrie's chagrin.
Move up beside Carrie and we can go 2 by 2 out of this place. I hear New York is lovely this time of year,
Carrie said. He knew how to get that windbag shut up. Maybe we can catch a few shows or share the Brooklyn Bridge with a massive mob of undead, like in the closing scene of that movie, Zombie. Oh, wait, we can hit Ashbury Park. Wasn't the largest ever zombie walk held there?
That's enough, Carrie,
Kevin growled. How about a strip club? I seem to remember catching you pulling it to zombie strippers that one time. Carrie continued until Kevin cut him off.
I said enough!
Kevin screamed. All four men saw it at the same time. They would not get through the horde without some difficulty. The undead had closed off their route, and more were pouring out onto the interstate every second.
Try to clip them,
Kevin instructed.
A body is a fairly solid object and will do serious damage to your vehicle if you hit it head-on at a high rate of speed.
Maybe if we asked nicely, Harry joked. Pardon me, sir or madam, would you mind too terribly much if I asked you to step aside just enough so that I can hit you with my truck without causing it any serious harm?
Just shut up and drive,
Kevin snapped.
And remember that Darren is right on your bumper, so no sudden stops, and don't speed up too much without telling him. If those things get in front of his car, he might not make it.
Gee, Mr. Obvious, Carrie said, leaving it open for the others to finish.
I never made the connection.
Mike and Darren finished the tag from one of their favorite radio morning show routines. Mike gripped his wheel tight as he slalomed between two small clusters of zombies that pawed at the empty air in his wake. He had no choice but to clip what had once been an elderly man with the front left bumper of his El Camino. Meanwhile, Kevin tapped the gas pedal enough to close the few feet that had opened between him and Mike. His escort bounced as he drove over part of one of the zombies that got bowled over by the flying body. More and more of the undead closed on the four vehicles. Kevin felt a tinge of panic start to churn in his gut. Sure, they'd seen plenty of zombies from the hotel room window, but truthfully, this was the first time that they were seeing them up close in such great numbers. Maybe this hadn't been such a good idea. His plan to hightail it to the South Dakota Badlands was a solid one. Little population to deal with would make it their best bet to start their own society. If they were lucky and picked up a few like-minded individuals along the way, that was fine, just as long as they understood that this was his baby. He had had plans in place for this exact event for over half his life. Kevin swerved to avoid a woman that must have weighed over 300 pounds in life. He had no doubt that in a showdown between her and his car, she would be the likely winner. His eyes passed over the sea of walking dead, taking in the variety of horrendous-looking injuries they all presented. He saw missing arms, torn open body cavities that spilled all sorts of viscera. Some had chunks missing from their face. Some had very little face left. Many sported a variety of bullet wounds, and others had an assortment of bladed weapons jutting out of them, like they were some sort of obscene novelty utensil holder.
Call today and get your life-sized zombie knife rack,
Kevin droned in his best television voiceover impersonation.
Never again risk cutting your finger when you reach into a drawer. Call now and we will include the cup holder hand attachment for no extra cost. I can see the light at the end of the tunnel,
Carrie's voice announced on the radio. Speaking of tunnels, maybe we can drive through a few of those next. That could be almost as much fun. Kevin picked up his handset and then put it back down. He was sick of listening to Carrie. He wasn't going to get into it with him. Not here, and not now. Besides, he was the brains of this outfit. If they thought that they could survive without him, let them try. He doubted any of them would make it a week. Another walking corpse lunged forward, slipping into the small space Kevin had left between his car and the bumper of Mike's El Camino. He was secretly thankful that it was a small child. He felt his escort shudder at the impact, the sound of something breaking, most likely the driver's side headlight, was barely audible over the sounds of roaring engines and moaning zombies. It took them almost an hour to break free of the mob that had closed in behind them. All the while, Carrie continued to rib Kevin, suggesting that perhaps they try this turnoff or that to see if any of the fast food places might still be open. Eventually, Kevin shut off his radio. He would rather listen to the cries of the undead than Carrie. The relative silence did give him time to figure something out that he doubted the others had discovered. When they had driven in on this exact route, the road had been mostly clear. Now it was an obstacle course. In places, the road was so thick that the El Camino and the U-Haul needed to plow the way. Sound. If nothing else, Kevin was certain that sound was instrumental in the undead homing in on a food source. There had to be a way to use that to their advantage. Perhaps if they created noisy distractions, they could have an easier time when it came to refueling or grabbing supplies.
Idiots,
Kevin thought smugly. I bet none of this is even registering for any of you. Chapter 4. Radio Traffic.
The miles ticked away. Dahlia was up on the seat beside me. Occasionally she would whimper, having been the youngest in my family and the ugly beginnings. I ain't no hero. I never thought of being one. When I was young, I didn't dream about being a police or fireman. I never considered joining the military, even after 9/11, when so many others my age flocked to the recruiter's office. Hell, I was the guy who picked a desk in the middle of the classroom on the first day of school, when all the brains rushed for front row seats and the jocks and stoners roamed to the back. I didn't play sports, at least not in any organized way. When sides were chosen, even if it was just a pickup game with my buddies, I was pointed out someplace in the middle. Sometimes I would pull off a play in football, basketball, kickball, whatever, which was only amazing because it was me doing it.